Romance o vlkodlakovi měňavci od Amelie Hartové. Kapitola 1. Špatné číslo. Sterilní vyšetřovna se dusila, když Sophie Carterová pracovala sama pod neúprosným světlem stropních světel. Na kovovém stole se nehybně rozvaloval německý ovčák, hruď se mu zvedala a klesala v mělkých, nepravidelných vzdeších, které jí svíraly žaludek starostí. Tmavé skvrny už promočily obvaz, který spěšně použila. A navzdory veškerému úsilí krvácení nejevilo žádné známky zastavení. Sophiiny prsty nahmataly psí tep a počítali rychlé, vláknité tepy, zatímco jí mysl probírala možnosti léčby, na které nebyla způsobilá. Klid, chlapče, zašeptala tichým hlasem navzdory úzkosti, která jí svírala hruď. Dostaneme tě z toho. Psí oči, zakalené bolestí, se upíraly na její tvář s druhem důvěry, která jí bolela v srdci. Vždycky měla na zvířata takový účinek. Zdálo se, že v ní cítila něco, čemu nerozuměla ani ona sama. Doktorka Reedová to nazývala darem, ale v tu chvíli to spíš připadalo jako břemeno, když sledovala, jak ovčák zápasí s každým nádechem. Ve svých 24 letech Sophie viděla už spoustu naléhavých případů. Ale dnešní večer byl jiný. Německého ovčáka přivezl zoufalý majitel hned po zavírací době, srazilo ho auto, které se ani neobtěžovalo zastavit. Náraz zanechal hluboké rány na boku a měla podezření na vnitřní krvácení. Bez řádného chirurgického vybavení a odborných znalostí doktorky Reedové bojovala prohranou bitvu. Klinika byla v 10:30 večer až děsivě tichá. Doktor Reed odešel o 3 hodiny dříve, mumlal si něco o narozeninové oslavě svého vnuka a nechal Sophie samotnou s naléhavými případy. Nevadilo jí to. Obvykle jí samota dávala prostor k přemýšlení, k soustředění se na uzdravení bez tlaku přihlížejících očí. Ale dnes večer se zdálo, že každý stín skrývá tajemství a každý zvuk ji děsí. Sophie pracovala na veterinární klinice Riverside 2 roky. Od té doby, co začala studovat veterinu. Plat nebyl vysoký, ale doktor Reed ji nechal řešit skutečné případy, místo aby jen uklízela psí boudy jako jiná brigády. Potřebovala zkušenosti a, co je důležitější, potřebovala peníze. Její malý byt nad prádelnou se sotva kvalifikoval jako bydlení, ale bylo to vše, co si mohla dovolit ze svého platu a studentských půjček. Její telefon ležel vybitý na linkě, jeho černá obrazovka odrážela její ustaraný výraz. Byla tak soustředěná na zraněného psa, že ho zapomněla nabít, a teď se baterie úplně vybila. Pevná linka ležela na stole doktora Reeda na druhé straně místnosti, ale musela jednat rychle. Psovi se dýchalo čím dál mělčeji a viděla, jak mu blednou dásně jasná známka šoku. Sakra, zamumlala, popadla telefon a vytočila číslo, o kterém si myslela, že je číslo doktora Reeda. Její prsty, kluské od nervózního potu, v tlumeném světle tápaly po klávesách. Žárovka nad hlavou vyhořela před hodinou, takže zbývalo jen vyšetřovací světlo. Chtěla ho vyměnit, ale zdálo se, že nikdy není dost času na údržbu, když zvířata umírají. Telefon zazvonil 1, 2krát, 3krát. Sophie netrpělivě poklepala nohou a ohlédla se po německém ovčákovi. Jeho oči se začaly zamlžovat a panika ji projela jako ledová voda. Už dříve ztratila trpělivost. Byla to nevyhnutelná součást veterinární medicíny, ale nikdy ne proto, že by se nedokázala včas dostat k pomoci. Konečně někdo odpověděl. Haló? Hlas byl špatný, příliš hluboký, příliš velitelský. Rozhodně to nebyl doktor Reedův známý chraplavý tón, ale zoufalství ji donutilo tlačit se vpřed. Nemohla zavěsit a ztrácet drahocenný čas dalším vytáčením. Doktor četl. Díky bohu, nadechla se do telefonu. Německému ovčákovi se zhoršuje. Potřebuji vás tady hned. Krvácení se nezastavuje a on dostává do šoku. Udělala jsem všechno, co jsem mohla. Ale nestačí to. Dýchá mělce. Klesá mu teplota a myslím, že by mohlo dojít k vnitřnímu poškození. Prosím, potřebuji vaši pomoc. Ticho se táhlo přes linku, těžké a podivné. Sophie slyšela v uších tlukot vlastního srdce. Cítila antiseptikum, které nikdy zcela nezakrylo skrytý pocit strachu a bolesti, jenž se držel každé veterinární kliniky. Ticho jí připadalo divné, nabité něčím, co nedokázala identifikovat. Kde jste? Hlas byl ostrý, autoritativní, rozhodně to nebyl doktor Reed. Sophie stuhla krev v žilách. Vytočila špatné číslo. V panice a vyčerpání si spletla čísla. Tváře jí zaplavila horkost, když se rozpaky smísily se zoufalstvím. Tohle byla přesně ta chyba, kterou si nemohla dovolit. Promiňte, vykoktala. Musela jsem vytočit špatné číslo. Myslela jsem, že jste někdo jiný. Snažila jsem se kontaktovat svého mentora ohledně lékařské pohotovosti. Místo, zopakoval hlas a něco v jeho tónu ji narovnalo. Nebyla to žádost, byl to rozkaz pronesený s autoritou, která vyžadovala okamžité splnění. Sophie se rozhlédla po prázdné klinice a náhle si uvědomila, jak je osamělá. Parkoviště venku bylo tmavé. Pouliční lampy vrhaly mezi budovy dlouhé stíny. Její otlučená Honda stála sama pod mihotavým bezpečnostním světlem. A za ní se k průmyslové čtvrti táhla jen tma. Kdokoliv by tam mohl být a sledovat ji a čekat. To vám nemůžu říct, řekla a snažila se do svého hlasu vnést sílu. Nevím, kdo jste. Tohle byla chyba. Řekl jste, že německý ovčák umírá. Hlas cizince byl teď klidný, téměř jemný, ale pod tou jemností se skrývala ocel. Potřebujete pomoc. Sophie se ohlédla na psa, jehož dech se stal ještě těžším. Jazyk měl vyplazený, v koutcích úst se mu hromadila růžová pěna. Ztrácela ho a doktor Reed stále nezvedal telefon. Za poslední hodinu se mu 3krát pokusila dovolat, pokaždé ale dostala jen hlasovou zprávu. Ruce sevřely kolem sluchátka, když stál před nemožnou volbou. V hlase cizince bylo něco, jistota, která naznačovala, že přesně ví, jakou pomoc potřebuje. Možná byl i veterinář. Někdo, kdo chápal zoufalství sledování toho, jak mu život utíká pryč. Možná ji vesmír spojil přesně s tou osobou, která mohla tomuto psovi zachránit život. Veterinární klinika Riverside, slyšela se říkat na Maple Street, hned za starou soudní budovou. Ale měla bych vás varovat. Volám policii, pokud nejste tím, za koho se vydáváte. Spojení se odmlčelo. Sophie zírala na telefon v ruce, srdce jí bušilo v žebrech. Co to právě udělala? Dala svou polohu úplně cizímu člověku. Někomu, kdo zvedl špatné číslo a nějakým způsobem ji přesvědčil, aby mu svěřila informace, které by ji mohly dostat do vážného nebezpečí. Ale německý ovčákův namáhavý dech jí připomněl, proč to riziko podstoupila. Vrátila se k vyšetřovacímu stolu a jemně položila ruce na bok psa. Jeho dech byl mělký, rychlý, tělesná teplota klesala i přes hřejivou dece, kterou ho zabalila. Zbývalo jí asi 20 minut, než ho úplně ztratí. Venku uslyšela zvuk motorů, ne jen jednoho auta, ale několika, jejichž světlomety prořezávaly tmu, když výjížděli na parkoviště kliniky. Sophie měla při pohledu z okna sucho v ústech. 3 černá SUV se rozmístila na parkovišti jako figurky na šachovnici, jejich tónovaná okna neprozrazovala nic o cestujících. Tohle nebyl doktor Reed. Tohle bylo něco úplně jiného. Motory se v dokonalé synchronizaci vypnuly a Sophie sledovala, jak z vozidel vycházejí postavy. I v tlumeném osvětlení viděla, jak se pohybují zdravou grácií, jejich postoje byly ostražité a připravené. Tohle nebyli veterináři, kteří by přijeli na pomoc v případě nouze. Tohle bylo něco mnohem nebezpečnějšího. Sophie nahmatala hlavu německého ovčáka, pohladila ho po uších a šeptala mu ujištění, že necítí, co se má stát. Neopustí zvíře, které jí svěřilo svůj život. Zvonek u dveří kliniky zazvonil, když někdo vešel. Kapitola 2. Nebezpeční cizinci. Muž, který vstoupil do kliniky, se pohyboval s plynulým sebevědomím někoho, kdo je zvyklý ovládat místnosti. Sophie se zatajil dech, když si prohlédla jeho impozantní postavu. Snadno stodou soponsutur, supansucemetin Pietro vysoký se širokými rameny, která dokonale vyplňovala jeho tmavou bundu. Jeho černé vlasy byly krátce ostříhané, profesionálně, ale na ostrých rysech jeho tváře ani na způsobu, jakým jeho téměř černé oči zdravým hodnocením přejížděly po klinice, nebylo nic jemného. Za ním šli další 4 muži, z nichž každý vyzařoval stejné kontrolované nebezpečí. Nebyli to žádní gangsteři ani obyčejní zločinci. Jejich drahé oblečení a koordinované pohyby naznačovaly něco mnohem sofistikovanějšího. Sophie pevněji sevřela vyšetřovací stůl, když se rozprostřeli malým prostorem a jejich oči s vojenskou přesností katalogizovaly východy a potenciální hrozby. Nejste doktor Reed, řekla Sophie, hrdá na to, že její hlas zůstal klidný i přes strach, který jí svíral krk. Pohled vůdce našel její a ona se cítila přitisknutá jako motýl pod sklem. Ne, souhlasil, jeho hlas zněl stejně hluboce jako bariton, kterým si určila svou polohu po telefonu. Jsem někdo, kdo dostal vaši zprávu o naléhavé situaci. Jací veterináři cestují v konvoji, zeptala se Sophie a ochranitelsky se postavila mezi cizince a zraněného německého ovčáka. Kdo jste vy, lidi? Místo odpovědi se muž opatrnými kroky přiblížil k vyšetřovacímu stolu a jeho pozornost se přesunula k umírajícímu psovi. Něco v jeho výrazu změklo, když si uvědomil stav zvířete. Mělké dýchání, krví nasáklé obvazy, skelné oči, které prozrazovaly blížící se smrt. Co se mu stalo, San zeptal se, a Sophie byla překvapena upřímným znepokojením v jeho hlase. Srazil ho a utekl, odpověděla automaticky, ale pak se zarazila. Ne, že by vám do toho bylo, ptala jsem se vás. Mužovi rty se skřivily do něčeho, co by mohlo být úsměvem. Jmenuji se Caspian Cross. Provozuji specializovanou veterinární praxi. Když jsem přijal váš hovor, myslel jsem si, že jeden z mých pacientů je v nebezpečí. Jak specializovaný? Sophie přimhouřila oči. A proč potřebujete bodyguardy pro domácí návštěvy? Pracuji se složitými případy, řekl Caspian hladce. Zvířata, kterých se ostatní vzdali. Co se týče bezpečnosti, budete překvapeni, jak emotivní jsou lidé, když jsou do toho zapojeni jejich domácí mazlíčci. Bylo to rozumné vysvětlení, ale něco v jeho tónu naznačovalo vrstvy významu, do kterých nebyla zasvěcena. Sophie si prohlížela jeho tvář a hledala známky podvodu. Její otec byl před smrtí podvodník a ona se naučila číst lži lidí v jemném zúžení kolem očí. V tom, jak se jim napínala ramena, když si vymýšleli historky. Caspian Cross něco skrýval, ale nedokázala odhalit naprostý podvod. Spíš jakoby říkal verzi pravdy upravenou pro její spotřebu. Pes umírá, řekla bez obalu. Pokud jste opravdu veterinář, dokažte to. Caspian si bez váhání vyhrnul rukávy a přešel k umyvadlu, kde si s nedostatkem praxe někoho myl ruce. Kdo to udělal 1000krát? Sophie sledovala, jak jemnýma, ale důkladnýma rukama prohlíží německého ovčáka, jeho prsty hledaly tlakové body, které přehlédla, jeho oči identifikovaly příznaky, které přehlédla. Zhroucená plíce, zamumlal spíš pro sebe, než pro ni. Pravděpodobně od nárazu. Proto je dýchání tak těžké. Sophie se sevřelo srdce. Nemám vybavení na hrudní chirurgii. Zemře, že? Ne, když budeme pracovat rychle. Caspianovi ruce se pohybovaly s překvapivou jemností. Když hladil psa po hlavě. Potřebuji, abyste ho držel v klidu. Zvládnete to? Samozřejmě, ale věřte mi, přerušil ho Caspian a něco v jeho očích ji přimělo mu věřit navzdory všem racionálním instinktům, které křičely varování. Následovalo nejintenzivnějších 20 minut Sophiina života. Caspian pracoval s nástroji z lékařské sady, kterou mu jeden z jeho mužů vyrobil, ruce měl pevné a jisté, když prováděl nouzové zákroky, které by byly výzvou i pro atestovaného veterinárního chirurga. Sophie zjistila, že pomáhá téměř automaticky. Její tělo reagovalo na jeho tiché povely dříve, než je její mysl stihla zpracovat. Tlak tady, nařídil a nasměroval jí ruce do správné polohy. Cítíš to? Plíce se znovu roztahuje. V okamžiku, kdy se jejich prsty dotkly, Sophie cítila, jak jí paží projíždí něco jako elektrický šok. Caspianovi ruce na okamžik znehybněly, jeho oči se k ní zadívaly s výrazem, který nedokázala interpretovat. Vzduch mezi nimi jakoby zhoustl, nabitý něčím, co nemělo nic společného s lékařskou pohotovostí. Soustřeď se, řekl tiše, ale jeho hlas trochu zdrsněl. Sophie přikývla a snažila se ignorovat zrychlený tep. Teď nebyl čas na jakoukoliv podivnou přitažlivost, která mezi nimi praskala. Život německého ovčáka visel na vlásku. Pod Caspianovým vedením stabilizovali psovi dýchání a zastavili vnitřní krvácení. Sophie s úžasem sledovala, jak se zvířeti zlepšuje barva, jeho dech se prohlubuje a pravidelněji stává. Bylo to, jako by sledovali zázrak. Jak si to věděl? Zeptala se, když to čistili. Ohledně kolapsu plic. Studuji veterinární medicínu už 3 roky a úplně mi to chybělo. Zkušenosti? Odpověděl Caspian. Ale v jeho tónu bylo něco vyhýbavého. Už jsem u psů viděl podobná zranění. Jeho odmlka byla u jiných zvířat téměř nepostřehnutelná. Sophie cítila, že v tom příběhu je něco víc. Ale německý ovčák si vybral právě ten okamžik, aby zvedl hlavu a podíval se na ní jasnýma, bystrýma očima. Zlepšení bylo dramatické, téměř nadpřirozeně rychlé. Bude v pořádku, řekl Caspian a pohladil psa po uších. Úplné uzdravení pravděpodobně do týdne. Za týden Sophie na něj zírala. Zranění, jako je toto, se obvykle úplně uzdraví až za měsíce. Některá zvířata jsou silnější než jiná, řekl Caspian. A znovu měla pocit, jako by mluvil v kódu. Jako by je přivolal nějaký neviditelný signál, se Caspianovi muži začali pohybovat ke dveřím. Sám vůdce ustoupil od vyšetřovacího stolu a jeho profesionální maska se vrátila na místo. Počkejte, zavolala Sophie. Potřebuji vědět, jak vás kontaktovat ohledně následné péče nebo případných komplikací. Caspian vytáhl z bundy vizitku a položil ji na pult. Sophie se na ní podívala. Drahý papír s reliéfním písmem, ale obsahující pouze jméno a telefonní číslo, žádnou firemní adresu, žádné reference, žádný údaj o tom, jakou praxi provozoval. Jestli cokoliv potřebuješ, řekl, zavolej na to číslo. A co platba? Zeptala se Sophie. Právě si zachránil život tomuhle psovi. Musím ti něco dlužit. Ber to jako profesionální zdvořilost, odpověděl Caspian, ale jeho oči se jí s intenzitou zastavily na tváři, až jí rozpálila kůži. I když bych ti doporučil být opatrnější, když se v noci procházíš sama. Tohle není nejbezpečnější čtvrť. Pracuji tu 2 roky, řekla Sophie defenzivně. Vím, jak se o sebe postarat. Jsem si jistá, že i ty. Caspianův úsměv byl záhadný, ale některá nebezpečí je hůře rozpoznatelná než jiná. Než se Sophie stihla zeptat, co tím myslí, už se s tou samou dravou grácí pohyboval ke dveřím. Jeho muži se kolem něj seřadili a během chvilky byla klinika prázdná, kromě Sophie a uzdravujícího se německého ovčáka. Sophie stála v náhlém tichu a snažila se zpracovat, co se právě stalo. Cizinec jí zvedl špatné číslo, přivedl tým mužů, kteří se pohybovali jako vojáci, prováděli veterinární operace technikami, které nikdy neviděla, a pak zmizel v noci jako ze sna. Zvedla jeho vizitku a přejela palcem po vystouplém písmu. Caspian Cross. Jméno jí připadalo povědomé, i když si byla jistá, že se nikdy předtím nepotkali. Něco na něm jí volalo. Něco, co jí nutilo mu věřit. Navzdory všem varovným signálům, které jí vzbuzovala logická mysl, německý ovčák tiše zafuněl a přitáhl její pozornost zpět k přítomnosti. Jeho oči byly jasné a bystré, jeho dech normální. Podle všeho by měl stále bojovat o život, ale místo toho vypadal, že je připraven seskočit ze stolu a běhat po parkovišti. Sophien telefon zavibroval textovou zprávou. Zapojila ho, když Caspian pracoval, a teď ukazoval několik zmeškaných hovorů od doktora Reeda. Promiň, holka, hlásala jeho hlasová schránka. Rodinná pohotovost trvala déle, než se očekávalo. Jak se má náš 4nohý pacient? Sophie zírala na telefon, pak na vizitku a pak na zázračně uzdraveného psa. Jak měla tohle všechno vysvětlit doktoru Reedovi? Jak mu mohla říct, že záhadný cizinec bez pověření provedl v jejich klinice akutní operaci a pak beze stopy zmizel? Venku uslyšela startování motoru auta. Sophie se rozběhla k oknu právě včas, aby spatřila osamělý černý sedan, jak odjíždí od obrubníku naproti. Sledoval někdo kliniku? Sledoval ji. Caspianova slova jí zněla v mysli. Některá nebezpečí jsou hůře odhalitelná než jiná. Do čeho se to zapletla? Kapitola 3. Stíny a vlci. Od záhadného setkání na klinice uplynuly 3 dny a Sophie se nemohla zbavit pocitu, že se její svět vychýlil z osy. Německý ovčák, kterému začala říkat Max, se kompletně uzdravil, což popíralo všechny principy veterinární vědy, které se naučila. Doktor Reed byl ohromen pokrokem zvířete a provedl další testy, které neprokázaly žádné stopy po těžkých zraněních, která ho málem zabila. Nikdy jsem nic takového neviděl, zamumlal doktor Reed a studoval Maxovi nejnovější rentgenové snímky. Je to, jako by se trauma nikdy nestalo. Plicní tkáň nevykazuje žádné jizvy, žádné známky nedávné rekonvalescence. Jste si naprosto jistý původní diagnózou? Sophie přikývla, i když se jí v hlase vkrádaly pochybnosti. Umíral, doktore Reed. Zhroucená plíce, vnitřní krvácení, šokové příznaky, všechno jsem zdokumentoval. Ale když hledala své poznámky z té noci, nikde je nenašla. Vyšetřovací formuláře, které vyplnila, zmizely spolu s jakýmikoliv fyzickými důkazy o Maxově původním stavu. Bylo to, jako by někdo úmyslně vymazal všechny důkazy o tom, co se stalo. Ještě znepokojivější než chybějící papíry bylo to, čeho si Sophie začala všímat po městě. Auta, která se objevovala všude, kam šla, různá vozidla, ale vždy s tónovanými okny, která jí bránila vidět cestující. Muž v kavárně, který odešel ihned po jejím příchodu. Pocit, že ji někdo sleduje, který jí brněl po zádech pokaždé, když šla k autu. Zpočátku to odmítla jako paranoju. Vedlejší účinek stresu z té noci. Ale ten pocit přetrvával a každým dnem sílil. Někdo rozhodně sledoval její pohyb. Sophie se pokusila vyhledat informace o Caspianovi. Našla jsem Cross online, ale jen sporé informace. Pár firemních záznamů pro Cross Industries, úspěšnou poradenskou firmu s kancelářemi ve 3 velkých městech, pár charitativních fotografií, na kterých je vždy bezvadně oblečený a obklopený společenskou elitou. Nic, co by vysvětlovalo jeho veterinární dovednosti nebo jeho malou armádu bodyguardů. Vizitka, kterou zanechal, obsahovala pouze jeho jméno a telefonní číslo. Zvedla ji tucetkrát, palec se vznášel nad klávesnicí telefonu, ale vždycky jí něco bránilo v zavolání, co by řekla. Děkuji, že jste zachránili psí život nemožnými léčebnými technikami. Prosím, vysvětlete mi, proč mám pocit, že mě někdo sleduje. Ve čtvrtek večer Sophie odcházela z kampusu později než obvykle. V hlavě jí hučely informace z její přednášky o pokročilé fyziologii zvířat. Profesorka Martinezová se zabývala regenerativním léčením u různých druhů a dotýkala se případů, kdy se zvířata zotavila ze zranění, která měla být smrtelná. Paralely s Maxovým zotavením byly znepokojivé. Univerzitní parkoviště bylo téměř prázdné. Většina studentů utekla kvůli víkendovým plánům nebo brigádám. Sophiina Honda stála pod mihotavým světlem, které vrhalo občasné stíny na asfalt. Parkovala na stejném místě 3 roky bez incidentů. Ale dnes večer se něco zdálo špatně. Zpoza dodávky zaparkované o 3 místa dál se vynořili 2 muži. Pohybovali se cílevědomě. Jejich pozornost se soustředila výhradně na ní. Sophie sevřela klíče v ruce. Svalová paměť z kurzu sebeobrany jí umožnila umístit nejdelší klíč mezi klouby. Sophie Carterová? Zeptal se vyšší muž s příliš širokým a příliš nacvičeným úsměvem. Kdo se ptá? Odpověděla a ustoupila k lépe osvětlenému místu poblíž vědecké budovy. Jsme vyšetřovatelé, řekl druhý muž a vytáhl peněženku, kterou ukázal příliš rychle, než aby si ji stihla přečíst. Potřebujeme se vás zeptat na pár otázek ohledně incidentu na vašem pracovišti před 3 dny. Jaký incident? Sophie se zrychlil tep, ale udržela si klidný hlas. Na klinice se nic nestalo. Pojďte, slečno Carterová, řekl první muž a zablokoval jí ústup. Víme o vašich návštěvnících, o mužích s drahými auty. Co po vás chtějí? Sophie se honila hlavou. Tito muži nebyli policisté. Jejich obleky byly příliš levné, jejich odznaky příliš prakticky krátké. Ale věděli o Caspianovi a jeho týmu, což znamenalo, že je tu noc sledovali. Nevím, o čem mluvíte, řekla a dál couvala. A nemusím odpovídat na vaše otázky bez řádného průkazu totožnosti. Muži si vyměnili pohledy a Sophie si všimla okamžiku, kdy se rozhodli přestat s předstíráním. Vyšší z nich sáhl do bundy, zatímco jeho partner se k ní přiblížil. Myslím, že to víte, řekl a jeho hlas ztratil falešnou přátelskost. A myslím, že nám všechno řeknete. Sophie se otočila a běžela. Za sebou uslyšela nadávky a těžké kroky. Vědecká budova byla 50 yardů odtud, ale její dveře byly po 20 nezamčené. Její auto bylo blíž, ale nikdy se jí nepodařilo dveře otevřít a motor nastartoval, než ji chytili. Zaplavila ji panika, když si uvědomila, jak je izolovaná. Pak uslyšela něco, co jí zmrazilo krev v žilách. Tiché, dunivé vrčení, které jakoby vycházelo odevšad najednou. Kroky za ní náhle ustaly. Sophie se otočila a uviděla, jak její pronásledovatelé couvají ze stínů mezi dvěma auty. Jejich tváře zbledly hrůzou. Vrčení zesílilo a z temnoty se vynořily mohutné postavy. Vlci 3 kusy, každý větší, než by jakékoliv divoké zvíře mělo být. Jejich srst byla tak tmavá, že se zdálo, že pohlcuje světlo a jejich oči zářily inteligencí, která byla znepokojivě lidská. Pohybovali se s koordinovanou přesností a postavili se mezi Sophie a oba muže. Co to sakra je? Zašeptal jeden z mužů, třásl se rukou, když sáhl po něčem v bundě. Největší vlčí pisky se odtáhly a odhalily tesáky, které se leskly jako slonovinové dýky. Zvuk, který vydával, se vůbec nepodobal vytí, které Sophie slyšela v dokumentech o přírodě. Tohle byl příslib násilí, varování, které přesahovalo hranice druhů. Oba muži se otočili a utekli, klopítali jeden přes druhého ve spěchu, aby se dostali ke své dodávce. Motor se s hřevem rozjel a oni s kvílejícími pneumatikami vyjeli z parkoviště a nechali Sophie samotnou se 3 obrovskými predátory. Sophie měla být vyděšená. Každý její instinkt ji měl nabádat, aby utekla, našla úkryt, volala o pomoc. Místo toho se přistihla, že si prohlíží oči největšího vlka. Byly tmavě modré, téměř černé a bolestně povědomé. Kaspické, zašeptala. Vlk nastražil uši a v jeho tváři se myhlo něco jako překvapení. Na okamžik stála všechna 3 zvířata naprosto nehybně, jako by její poznání změnilo nějakou základní rovnici. Pak se stíny mezi auty zatřpitily a tam, kde předtím stáli vlci, teď čekali 3 muži. Sophiina mysl se snažila zpracovat to, co právě viděla. Logika se potýkala s důkazy jejich vlastních očí. Kaspian vstoupil do světla, plně lidský, ale nějakým způsobem si zachoval stejnou dravou eleganci. Jeho oblečení bylo tmavé a drahé, bez jediné vrásky, která by naznačovala, že se právě proměnil z úplně jiné podoby. Jsi zraněný? Zeptal se. Jeho hlas zněl stejnou autoritou, jakou si pamatovala z kliniky. Sophie selhala, když se snažila formulovat slova, která by vystihla nemožnost toho, co právě viděla. Nejsi člověk. Ne, souhlasil Kaspian jednoduše. Nejsem. To ležérní přiznání ji zasáhlo jako fyzická rána. Všechno, co si myslela, že o světě ví, se právě obrátilo vzhůru nohama. Měniči tvarů byli skuteční. Muž, který Maxovi zachránil život, byl něco z legend a hororů. Co jsi zač? Podařilo se jí zeptat. Říkáme si měňavci, řekl Kaspian a opatrnými kroky se přiblížil, jako by se blížil k plachému zvířeti. Sdílíme tento svět s lidmi, ale raději zůstáváme nepovšimnuti. Ti muži, řekla Sophie a pohlédla směrem, kam zmizela dodávka. Věděli o tobě. Ptali se na tu noc na klinice. Kaspianův výraz potemněl. Co jsi jim řekla? Nic. Nevěděla jsem, o čem mluví. Sophie se objala rukama, navzdory mírnému večeru jí náhle schladilo. Jak to věděli? Jak mě našli? Protože tě se mnou viděli, řekl Kaspian a v jeho hlase se objevila vina. Být spojován s mým druhem tě vystavuje nebezpečí ze strany lidí, kteří by tyto znalosti zneužili k vlastním účelům. K jakým účelům? Místo odpovědi Kaspian okamžitě vytáhl telefon a tichým, naléhavým tónem promluvil k někomu na druhém konci. Sophie zachytila úlomky. Okamžitá evakuace a zdvojnásobení perimetru. To jí sevřelo žaludek novým strachem. Musíme tě dostat na bezpečné místo, řekl a ukončil hovor. V bezpečí před čím? Zeptala se Sophie. Ničemu z toho nerozumím. Před 3 dny jsi zachránil život psovi. Teď mi říkáš, že jsi nějaký vlkodlak a lidé mě loví, protože jsem toho byl svědkem. Je to složitější, řekl Kaspian opatrně. Ale ano, v podstatě existují mezi lidmi frakce, které vědí o naší existenci. Někteří nás chtějí studovat, jiní nás chtějí ovládat a někteří nás chtějí úplně eliminovat. To, že tě viděli se mnou, tě dostalo na jejich radar. Sophie se zasmála ostrým zvukem lemovaným hysterií. To je šílené. Jsem studentka veterináře. Učím se na zkoušky a bojím se platit nájem. Nezabývám se tajnými organizacemi a měňavci. Teď už ano, řekl Kaspian tiše. Promiň, Sophie. Kdybych věděl, že ten hovor, kdybych tě ohrozil, našel bych si tu noc jiný způsob, jak ti pomoct. Našel jsem si jiný způsob, jak ti pomoct. Zvedl si špatné číslo. Ne, řekl Kaspian a jeho oči se setkaly s jejími. Zvedl jsem přesně ten hovor, na který jsem měl. Než se Sophie stihla zeptat, co tím myslí, ozval se vzdálený zvuk motorů po parkovišti. Rychle se blížilo několik vozidel. Tvoji přátelé? Zeptala se. Kaspian měl zachmuřený výraz, když počítal světla. Ne. A došel nám čas. Kapitola 4. Útočiště v horách. Útok přišel s brutální efektivitou. Černá SUV s řevem vtrhla na parkoviště ze 3 směrů, jejichž světlomety prořezávaly tmu jako reflektory. Muži se vyhrnuli z vozidel ještě předtím, než se úplně zastavila, a pohybovali se s vojenskou přesností, která Sophie zmrazila krev v žilách. Dole! Vyštěkl Kaspian, jeho ruka se jí dostala do bederní části zad a zatlačila ji za betonový sloup. Sophie se krčila ve stínu, srdce jí bušilo, když sledovala, jak se Kaspian a jeho 2 společníci s plynulou grácií mění do vlčích podob. Proměna byla fascinující a děsivá. Kosti se protahovaly, svaly se vlnily, lidské rysy rozplývající se v něco divokého a mocného. Během několika vteřin stáli na místě, kde před chvílí stáli muži, 3 obrovští vlci. Bitva se nepodobala ničemu, co si Sophie kdy představovala. Vlci se pohybovali jako tekutá tma a útočili z mnoha úhlů koordinovanými útoky, které svědčily o letech společného boje. Jejich soupeři však byli připraveni na nadpřirozené protivníky, ovládali zbraně, které praskaly elektřinou a stříleli projektily se stříbrnými hroty. Uspávací prostředky. Sophie slyšela jednoho z útočníků křičet. Potřebujeme je živé. Největší vlk, Kaspian, přeskočil auto a srazil se ke 2 mužům současně, jeho mohutná postava se pohybovala neuvěřitelnou rychlostí. Ale i když bojoval, Sophie viděla, že jsou v menšině. Přijížděla další vozidla a vylévala čerstvé posily. Šipka s uspávacím prostředkem zasáhla jednoho z Kaspianových společníků do ramene. Vlk se zakopl a jeho pohyby se zpomalily, jak léky začaly účinkovat. Kaspianovo úzkostné vytí se rozléhalo po parkovišti, když se snažil dostat ke svému padlému členovi smečky. Sophie se nemohla jen schovávat a dívat. Tito tvorové, tito muži, bojovali, aby ji ochránili, a jeden z nich měl být kvůli tomu zajat. Bez přemýšlení popadla klíče od auta a rozběhla se ke své Hondě. Sophie, ne. Kaspianův hlas se nesl i v jeho vlčí podobě, psychická projekce, která jí s překvapivou jasností udeřila do mysli. Ale už seděla za volantem, motor řval k životu. Sophie vyrůstala v pěstounské péči a střídala se mezi rodinami, které ji vnímaly jako přítěž nebo výplatu. Řídit se naučila ve 13 letech. Ukradla auto svého pěstouna, aby unikla jeho toulavým rukám. Projížďka po vedlejších silnicích, aby se vyhnula policii, ji naučila dovednostem, které už nikdy nečekala, že bude potřebovat. Utekla z plynového pedálu a její Honda se vrhla na útočníkova vozidla jako střela. Moment překvapení jí vykoupil drahocenné vteřiny, když se muži vrhli do úkrytu. Sophie prudce zatočila volant doprava, její auto sklouzlo do strany a narazilo do 2 SUV tak silně, že jim zmačkalo přední části. Toto rozptýlení dalo Kaspianovi prostor, který potřeboval. Vrhl se ke svému zraněnému společníkovi, popadl uspaného vlka za zátylek a táhl ho do stínů. Třetí člen jejich skupiny mu poskytl krytí, jeho vrčení a cvakání zubů drželo útočníky na uzdě. Tudy. Kaspian se posunul dozadu. The human form, his voice urgent as he beckoned Sophie from behind the science building. Sophie abandoned her ruined car and ran toward him, adrenaline making her movements sharp and precise. Behind her, shouts erupted as their attackers reorganized. But Caspian was already leading her into the wooded area behind the campus. They ran through the darkness for what felt like hours, following paths that Sophie hadn't known existed. Caspian moved with the confidence of someone who knew every tree and stone, while his companions flanked them in their wolf forms, ears constantly swiving to catch sounds of pursuit. When they finally stopped, Sophie's lungs burned and her legs shook with exhaustion. They stood in a clearing where a sleek black helicopter waited, its rotors already spinning. The pilot looked like another of Caspian's people. Alert, professional, deadly. "Where are we going?" Sophie shouted over the noise of the engines. "Somewhere safe," Caspian replied, helping her into the aircraft. "Somewhere they can't reach you." The helicopter lifted into the night sky, carrying Sophie away from everything familiar. Below, the lights of the city grew smaller until they were just scattered stars against the darkness. She pressed her face to the window, watching her old life disappear into the distance. Caspian sat across from her, his expression grim as he spoke into a radio headset. Even without hearing the conversation, Sophie could tell it was bad news. His jaw tightened with each exchange, and his knuckles went white where he gripped the armrest. After 40 minutes of flight, they descended toward a compound nestled in what looked like pristine wilderness. Sophie could make out buildings arranged around a central courtyard, their architecture blending seamlessly with the forest that surrounded them. Security lights illuminated defensive positions that spoke of serious preparation for exactly this kind of situation. The helicopter touched down on a landing pad carved from native stone. As the rotors wound down, Sophie found herself surrounded by more of Caspian's people. They moved with the same predatory grace she was beginning to associate with shifters, their eyes reflecting an inner light that marked them as something other than human. "Welcome to Raven's Ridge," Caspian said, extending his hand to help her from the aircraft. "This is the heart of my territory." Sophie accepted his assistance, though the contact sent that same electric shock up her arm. "Your territory?" "I'm what our kind calls an alfa," Caspian explained as they walked toward the main building. "I lead the shifter community along the western coast. This compound serves as our headquarters and sanctuary." The interior of the main building was surprisingly warm and comfortable. Stone walls were softened by rich tapestries and carefully chosen artwork. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, its flames casting dancing shadows across leather furniture that looked both expensive and well-used. "You must be exhausted," Caspian said, his formal tone at odds with the intimate setting. "Owen will show you to your room. We can talk more in the morning when you've had time to process everything." A man stepped forward, tall, dark-haired, with the same predatory grace as the others, but warmer eyes. "I'm Owen Cross," he said with a slight smile. "Caspian's brother and second in command. Let me get you settled." Sophie followed Owen through hallways lined with photographs showing the compound's history. She caught glimpses of Caspian in many of them, sometimes in formal settings with other serious-looking people, other times in candid shots with what were clearly pack members. In every image, he carried himself with the natural authority of someone born to lead. The guest room Owen led her to was more luxurious than any hotel Sophie had ever seen. A king-size bed dominated the space, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the forest beyond. A fireplace had already been lit, casting warm light across polished wood floors covered with thick rugs. "The bathroom is through there," Owen said, indicating a doorway. "You'll find clothes in the closet. We keep items in various sizes for situations like this. If you need anything else, just pick up the phone. The kitchen staff can prepare whatever you'd like to eat." "Situations like this," Sophie asked, "do you rescue people from shadowy government organizations often?" Owen's smile was rofal. "More often than we'd like. The human world isn't as separate from ours as most people believe. There are always those who want to exploit the connection. What do they want with me?" "I'm nobody special." "You were seen with our alpha," Owen said simply. "That makes you special by association." And he paused, studying her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "There might be more to it than that. Caspian will explain when he's ready." After Owen left, Sophie stood alone in the luxurious room, trying to process the events of the last few hours. This morning, her biggest concern had been a midterm exam in comparative anatomy. Now she was a guest. Or was it prisoner in a supernatural stronghold, protected by creatures that shouldn't exist from enemies she didn't understand? She moved to the windows, looking out at the forest that stretched to the horizon. Somewhere in those trees, she knew were patrols of shifter guards keeping watch for threats. The thought should have been comforting, but instead it emphasized how completely her world had changed. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Sophie turned to find a young woman entering with a tea service, her movements graceful and silent. "I'm Luna," she said with a warm smile. "I thought you might want something to help you sleep." "Thank you," Sophie said, accepting the steaming cup. The tea smelled of herbs she couldn't identify, but it carried an immediate sense of calm. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you like them?" "A shifter." Luna nodded. "Most of us here are. This compound houses about 200 pack members and their families. We're not just warriors. We're teachers, doctors, engineers, artists. We live full lives just hidden from the human world. Why hide? If there are so many of you, why not just reveal yourselves?" Luna's expression grew sad because humans fear what they don't understand. History is full of what happens when they discover something different. We've learned that survival means secrecy. After Luna left, Sophie sipped the herbal tea and tried to make sense of her situation. She was safe but trapped, protected but isolated from everything she'd known. And at the center of it all was Caspian Cross, the enigmatic alpha who'd answered her desperate phone call and changed her life forever. Through her window, she could see lights moving through the forest. The patrols Owen had mentioned. Her protectors were out there keeping watch through the night. But as sleep finally claimed her, Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that she was no longer Sophie Carter, veterinary student and small-town nobody. She was something else now, though she didn't yet understand what. Chapter 5. Hidden Blood. Sophie woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the distant sound of voices carrying across the mountain air. For a moment, she lay still, hoping the events of the previous night had been nothing more than a vivid nightmare. But the luxurious bed and forest view beyond the glass confirmed that her world had indeed been turned upside down. A soft knock interrupted her disorientation. "Sophie, it's Luna. I've brought breakfast." The young shifter entered with a tray that smelled like heaven: fresh coffee, warm pastries, and what looked like homemade jam. She set it on a small table by the windows, her movements carrying that same fluid grace. Sophie was beginning to associate with Caspian's people. "How did you sleep?" Luna asked, pulling back the curtains to reveal a breathtaking view of the mountain valley. "Better than I expected," Sophie admitted, wrapping herself in the silk robe she'd found hanging in the bathroom. "Though I keep waiting to wake up and discover this was all a dream." Luna's smile was understanding. "The first contact with our world is always overwhelming. You're handling it remarkably well." "Am I? Because I feel like I'm barely holding it together." "Trust me, you're doing fine. I've seen humans discover our existence before, and most of them end up catatonic or hysterical. You fought back last night. That takes courage." Sophie sipped the coffee, which was better than anything she'd ever tasted, and studied Luna's face. The young woman couldn't be much older than herself, but her eyes held a wisdom that spoke of experiences far beyond her apparent years. "How long have you lived here?" Sophie asked. "All my life. I was born at Raven's Ridge," Luna replied, settling into the chair across from her. "My parents were part of Caspian's father's pack. When the old Alpha died and Caspian took over, nothing really changed for those of us who grew up here. This has always been home." "What happened to his father?" Luna's expression grew somber. "Murdered, along with his mother. Caspian was only 22 when he inherited the leadership of 12 pack territories. Most people thought he was too young, too inexperienced. He spent the last 7 years proving them wrong." Sophie felt a pang of unexpected sympathy. She understood what it meant to lose parents too young, to have to navigate the world without the people who were supposed to guide you through it. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I know what that's like. You lost your parents, too. When I was 16, car accident. Or at least, that's what I was told." Sophie set down her coffee cup, surprised by how easy it was to talk to Luna. "I was shuffled between foster homes until I aged out of the system." Not quite the same as inheriting supernatural leadership responsibilities, but loss is loss, Luna finished gently, and Caspian would understand that better than most. He's drawn to people who face tragedy and come out stronger. Before Sophie could ask what she meant by that, another knock sounded at the door. This time it was Owen, his expression serious as he entered. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but Caspian needs to see you. We've had some developments overnight." Sophie's stomach clenched with anxiety. "What kind of developments?" "The kind better discussed in private," Owen replied, his tone diplomatic but firm. Sophie quickly dressed in the clothes that had been provided. Jeans and a sweater that fit perfectly, though she tried not to think too hard about how they'd known her exact size. Owen led her through the compound, past training areas where shifters practiced combat in both human and wolf forms. She couldn't help staring at the casual way they moved between shapes, as if changing form was as natural as breathing. Some fought as humans with weapons she'd never seen before, while others prowled the practice ring as massive wolves, their movements coordinated with an intelligence that went far beyond animal instinct. "Impressive, isn't it?" Owen said, noticing her fascination. "Most of us start training from childhood. By adulthood, the shift is as natural as walking. How many of you are there? Shifters, I mean. More than humans suspect. Fewer than we'd like," Owen replied carefully. "We're scattered across the globe in packs and territories. Caspian's domain is one of the largest in North America." They entered a building that felt more like a corporate office than part of a supernatural stronghold. Glass-walled conference rooms lined a central corridor, while the air hummed with the quiet efficiency of important work being done. Through open doorways, Sophie caught glimpses of people working at computer terminals, their screens displaying information she couldn't interpret. Caspian waited in a corner office that managed to be both professional and unmistakably his. The furniture was expensive but functional, while the walls displayed maps marked with symbols she didn't recognize. He stood with his back to them, staring out a window that offered a commanding view of the compound's defenses. "Thank you, Owen," he said without turning around. "Close the door, please." Sophie found herself alone with the alpha for the first time since their rescue. In daylight, Caspian seemed even more imposing. Not just because of his physical presence, but because of the authority that radiated from him like heat from a flame. This was a man accustomed to making life or death decisions, to carrying the weight of hundreds of lives on his shoulders. "How are you feeling?" he asked, finally turning to face her. "Confused, overwhelmed, grateful." Sophie replied honestly, "Your people have been incredibly kind. They're good people. They deserve protection, which is why what I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear." Sophie's mouth went dry. What happened? Caspian moved to his desk, picking up a tablet and scrolling through information that made his jaw tighten with anger. "The men who attacked us last night weren't random opportunists. They were part of an organization we've been tracking for months. Humans who capture and experiment on shifters." "Experiment how?" "They're trying to replicate our abilities. Create artificial shifters they can control." Caspian's voice was flat, but Sophie could hear the rage burning underneath. "They've been targeting isolated pack members, especially those with rare gifts." Sophie sank into one of the chairs facing his desk, her legs suddenly unsteady. "And they think I have rare gifts. We think they know something about you that you don't know about yourself," Caspian said gently. "Sophie, when you touched that injured German shepherd at the clinic, what did you feel?" "I felt connected to him, like I could sense his pain. Understand what he needed." Sophie frowned, remembering. "But that's not unusual for me. I've always been good with animals." "Too good," Caspian said. "The way you handled that dog's injury, the speed of his recovery, the fact that you were able to assist with medical procedures you'd never seen before. It all points to abilities that go beyond normal human capabilities." Sophie laughed shakily. "Are you saying I'm part shifter? Because I'm pretty sure I'd know if I could turn into a wolf." "Not all supernatural bloodlines manifest as shape-shifting," Caspian explained, moving around the desk to sit in the chair beside her. There are healers, empaths, seers, humans with dormant supernatural heritage who possess abilities their conscious minds don't recognize. That's impossible. I know my family history. My parents were completely normal people. Caspian's expression grew even more serious. Sophie, we've been investigating your background since that night at the clinic. Your parents weren't killed in a car accident. The words hit her like a physical blow. Sophie felt the air leave her lungs as the world seemed to tilt around her. What? They were murdered by the same organization that attacked us last night. Caspian's voice was gentle but implacable. Your parents were part of a bloodline of healers, humans who could cure injuries and illnesses that would kill others. They refused to work with these people, so they were eliminated. Sophie stood abruptly, pacing to the window as her mind reeled. Everything she'd believed about her life, about her family, about herself, was crumbling like sand. "You're lying," she whispered. But even as she said it, pieces were falling into place. The way animals had always trusted her instinctively. The strange dreams she'd had as a child, filled with images of light and healing. The foster families who'd called her too intense, who'd seemed almost afraid of her sometimes. "I wish I were," Caspian said quietly. "But the evidence is overwhelming. And Sophie, there's more." She turned to face him, dreading what other revelations he might have. "More? The healing abilities you inherited aren't just rare. They're legendary. Your bloodline produces healers maybe once every 100 years. If these people capture you, they won't just study you. They'll use you to create an army of artificial shifters that could destroy everything we've built." Sophie sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was telling her. "I don't feel powerful. I don't feel special. I'm just me." "You're more than you know," Caspian said. And something in his voice made her look up. His eyes were intense, searching her face as if looking for something specific. "Sophie, when we touched at the clinic, did you feel anything unusual?" Heat flooded her cheeks as she remembered the electric shock that had passed between them. "Yes, but I thought that was just attraction. It was more than that." Caspian leaned forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "What you felt was the beginning of a mate bond." "A what?" "Among shifters, we have destined partners. When we meet them, there's an immediate recognition, a connection that goes beyond the physical or emotional." Caspian's voice grew rough. "Sophie, you're not just a healer. You're my mate." The room went silent, except for the sound of Sophie's ragged breathing. Everything was too much. The revelations about her parents, about her abilities, about the connection she felt to this dangerous, compelling man. "I need air," she managed to say, standing on unsteady legs. "Sophie, wait!" But she was already moving toward the door, desperate to escape the intensity of his gaze and the implications of everything he'd just told her. She fled through the corridors, past surprised pack members, toward the exit that would take her into the forest where she could think clearly. Behind her, she heard Caspian calling her name. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. Not when her entire understanding of herself had just been destroyed and rebuilt in the span of a single conversation. The forest welcomed her with cool shadows and the rustle of wind through pine needles. Sophie ran deeper into the woods, following a path that seemed to call to her instincts. Only when she could no longer see the compound behind her did she finally stop, leaning against a massive tree trunk as she struggled to catch her breath. Her parents had been murdered. She had supernatural abilities. She was supposedly destined to be with a man she'd known for less than a week. And somewhere out there, People were hunting her for her blood. Chapter 6. Blood and Betrayal. Sophie had been walking through the forest for almost an hour when the tranquilizer dart hit her shoulder. The sharp pain was followed immediately by a spreading numbness that made her legs buckle beneath her. She managed one strangled cry before her voice failed entirely, her body betraying her as the drugs took hold. Through blurring vision, she watched figures emerge from the trees around her. They moved with military precision, faces hidden behind tactical masks, weapons trained on her prone form. One of them spoke into a radio with calm professionalism. Package acquired. Beginning extraction. Sophie tried to fight as they lifted her, tried to call out for Caspian, but her body no longer obeyed her commands. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness claimed her was the canopy of pine branches disappearing as they carried her away from safety. When awareness returned, Sophie found herself in what looked like a medical facility carved from raw stone. The walls were rough-hewn rock, but the equipment was state-of-the-art, monitoring devices, surgical instruments, and restraints that held her firmly to a metal examination table. Bright lights overhead made her eyes water as she tried to focus on her surroundings. "Ah, you're awake. Excellent." The voice was cultured, refined, with just a hint of an accent she couldn't place. Sophie turned her head to see a man in an expensive suit approaching her table. He was tall and lean, with perfectly styled blonde hair and cold blue eyes that studied her with scientific interest. "Who are you?" Sophie's voice came out as a croak, her throat dry from whatever drugs they'd given her. "My name is Victor Crane," he said, pulling up a chair beside her table. "And you, my dear, are far more valuable than you realize. I don't know what you're talking about." Sophie tested the restraints holding her wrists and ankles, but they were designed to hold much stronger creatures than herself. Victor's smile was patronizing. "Of course you don't. That's the beauty of dormant bloodlines. The power exists whether you're aware of it or not. Tell me, Sophie Carter, do you know what your parents really were?" Despite Caspian's revelations earlier, hearing it from this stranger's lips sent ice through her veins. "My parents were normal people. Normal people don't possess the genetic markers for supernatural healing abilities," Victor said, consulting a tablet in his hands. "Normal people don't carry bloodlines that can trace their ancestry back to the original healers who walked alongside the first shifters centuries ago." He stood and moved to a nearby table covered with medical instruments. Sophie's heart rate spiked as she watched him examine various syringes and scalpels with casual interest. "You see, my dear, your parents made a terrible mistake 16 years ago. When my organization approached them about joining our research program, they refused. They believed their gifts should remain hidden, used only to help animals and the occasional human who stumbled across their path." "So, you killed them," Sophie whispered, pieces of a horrific puzzle falling into place. "We removed an obstacle," Victor corrected matter-of-factly, "and we've been watching you ever since, waiting for your abilities to manifest. Imagine our surprise when our surveillance indicated you'd made contact with Caspian Cross, the most powerful alpha on the western seaboard." Victor returned to his chair, leaning forward with predatory interest. "That connection accelerated your awakening, didn't it? Being near such a powerful shifter, feeling the pull of the mate bond, it triggered abilities that might have remained dormant for years." Sophie said nothing, but her silence seemed to confirm his suspicions. "The beauty of healer bloodlines," Victor continued, "is that the abilities work regardless of the subject's cooperation. Your touch can cure injuries, accelerate healing, even bring someone back from the brink of death. All we need is your blood, your genetic material, and we can synthesize that power." "To do what?" Sophie demanded, though she dreaded the answer. "To create controllable shifters, of course. Imagine an army of supernatural soldiers, all bound to obey human commanders. No more hiding in the shadows. No more pretending to be the weaker species. Victor's eyes gleamed with fanatic fervor. With your healing abilities incorporated into our serum, our artificial shifters will be nearly immortal. A door opened at the far end of the chamber, and several people in lab coats entered wheeling equipment that looked like something from a nightmare. IVs, extraction devices, machines Sophie didn't recognize but which radiated menace. "The process will be somewhat uncomfortable," Victor said conversationally. "But don't worry, we need you alive and relatively healthy for the foreseeable future. Think of yourself as a renewable resource." Sophie pulled against her restraints with desperate strength, but the metal held firm. "Caspian will find me. He'll tear this place apart." "Oh, I'm counting on it," Victor replied with genuine pleasure. "You see, dear Sophie, you're not just bait for one alpha. Cross isn't the only shifter who's shown interest in your unique abilities. By the time we're finished here, every major pack leader on the continent will be trying to rescue you." The implications hit Sophie like a sledgehammer. "You want them to come? I want them to walk into the trap we've spent months preparing. Motion sensors, gas dispensers filled with concentrated tranquilizers, capture protocols designed specifically for supernatural physiology." Victor gestured to the stone walls around them. "This facility has been designed as the ultimate shifter prison. Every alpha who comes for you will become another test subject." One of the lab technicians approached with a large syringe, its needle gleaming under the harsh lights. Sophie's healing abilities might be dormant to her conscious mind, but her body recognized the threat instinctively. Power she'd never known she possessed suddenly blazed to life, flowing through her veins like liquid fire. The restraints holding her left wrist snapped. Victor's eyes widened with excitement rather than alarm. "Magnificent! Did you see that?" The stress response triggered a massive surge in her cellular energy output. Sophie used her free hand to tear at the remaining restraints, but the technicians were already moving. More syringes appeared, filled with sedatives designed to suppress supernatural abilities. But as the first needle pierced her skin, Sophie's power lashed out instinctively. The technician who'd injected her suddenly straightened, his eyes clearing as if he'd awakened from a long sleep. Confusion replaced the cold professionalism on his face as he looked around the chamber. "What am I doing here?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine bewilderment. "Where are we?" Victor cursed and grabbed a weapon from one of the guards, shooting the confused technician with a tranquilizer dart. As the man collapsed, Victor turned to Sophie with renewed interest. "Fascinating. Your healing abilities can not only cure physical ailments, but also mental conditioning. That technician had been psychologically programmed for months, and you undid it with a single touch." Sophie had freed her other wrist and was working on the ankle restraints when alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red lights flashed, and automated voices announced security breaches in multiple sectors. "Right on schedule," Victor said, checking his watch. "Your mate has excellent timing." Through the facility's intercom system, Sophie could hear sounds of battle, growls, gunfire, and the distinctive sound of metal being torn apart. Hope blazed in her chest as she recognized the fury in those wolf howls. Caspian had found her, but Victor seemed unperturbed by the chaos. "Guards, initiate Protocol 7. It's time to welcome our guests properly." Gas began hissing from vents in the ceiling, not the killing kind, but Sophie could smell the chemical tang of the tranquilizers Victor had mentioned. Whatever concentration they were using was strong enough to affect shifters, which meant it would overwhelm her human physiology in seconds. Sophie freed her ankles and rolled off the examination table, just as the chamber door exploded inward. Caspian stood in the doorway in human form, his clothes torn and bloody, his eyes blazing with protective fury that made him look more wolf than man. "Get away from her," he snarled, his voice carrying harmonics that spoke of barely controlled transformation. "I don't think so," Victor replied calmly, pressing a remote control in his hand. The floor beneath Caspian's feet suddenly gave way, dropping him into a pit lined with silver spikes. Sophie screamed as she watched him fall, but Caspian managed to catch the edge of the pit, his enhanced strength allowing him to hang suspended above the deadly trap. "Silver-lined capture pit," Victor explained conversationally. "Painful for shifters to touch, but not immediately fatal. We want him alive for the experiments after all." Sophie's power surged again, stronger this time, fueled by rage and desperation. She could feel Caspian's pain through their net bond, could sense his strength failing as the silver burned his hands. Without thinking, she lunged toward Victor's. Her hands glowing with energy, she was only beginning to understand. "Sophie, don't!" Caspian's warning came too late. Victor caught her wrists in hands that felt like steel cables, his grip far stronger than any human should possess. As their skin made contact, Sophie realized with horror that her healing power was flowing into him, not harming him. "Thank you, my dear," Victor said, as supernatural energy coursed through his body. "I was wondering how to field test our enhancement serum. Your power will make an excellent catalyst." Sophie watched in growing terror as Victor's eyes began to glow with stolen energy, as his already impressive strength increased beyond human limitations. She'd just given their enemy the power to become something far worse than a mere human fanatic. She'd created a monster. Chapter 7. The Alpha's Claim. Victor's enhanced strength lifted Sophie off the ground as stolen power coursed through his system. His eyes blazed with supernatural energy that didn't belong to him, and his grip on her wrists felt like iron manacles. But even as terror flooded through her, Sophie could feel something else. A connection that went deeper than fear or pain. Caspian's presence in her mind, urgent and desperate. "Sophie, listen to me. The bond between us. Use it. My strength is yours." She didn't understand what he meant until she felt it. Power flowing not just from her into Victor, but from Caspian into her. The mate bond he'd spoken of was more than emotional connection. It was a conduit that allowed them to share abilities, to become more than the sum of their parts. Impossible. Victor snarled as he felt the change in her energy signature. "You're just a human with dormant abilities." "No," Sophie said, her voice stronger than it had been moments before. "I'm something else entirely." The power building within her wasn't just healing energy anymore. It carried the force of Caspian's alpha authority, the protective fury of a mate defending his chosen partner. Sophie had never felt anything like the strength flowing through her veins, transforming her from victim to something far more dangerous. Victor's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. "You're bonding right now in the middle of battle. You're completing a mate connection that takes most shifter pairs months to achieve." "Some bonds are stronger than others," Caspian said through gritted teeth as he hauled himself out of the silver-lined pit. His hands were burned and bleeding from contact with the toxic metal. But determination drove him forward. Sophie channeled the combined power flowing through her into a surge of pure healing energy. But instead of letting Victor steal it, she reversed the flow. Every enhanced ability he'd absorbed, every artificial modification his body had undergone. She began systematically dismantling. Victor screamed as his stolen strength turned against him. The enhancements that had made him superhuman became weaknesses as Sophie's power identified them as foreign elements to be purged. His grip on her wrists loosened as his body convulsed with the effort of containing energies at war within his cells. "Kill them both!" Victor managed to shout to his remaining guards. But Caspian was already moving, his injuries forgotten in the face of mortal threat to his mate. He shifted mid-leap, human form dissolving into the massive black wolf that had first saved Sophie in the parking lot. His jaws closed around the throat of the nearest guard, while his claws rad across tactical armor designed to stop bullets, but not supernatural fury. Sophie felt every moment of the battle through their growing connection. Caspian's pain became hers, but so did his strength, his speed, his predatory instincts honed by years of leadership. She'd never fought anyone in her life, but now she moved with borrowed knowledge, ducking attacks and striking back with precision that surprised her enemies. More guards poured into the chamber, but they faced opponents who were no longer merely human and shifter. Sophie and Caspian fought as a bonded pair, each anticipating the other's moves, covering weaknesses and amplifying strengths through their psychic link. "This is impossible!" Victor gasped, struggling to maintain control as Sophie's power continued dismantling his enhancements. "Mate bonds don't activate this quickly. The process takes time, preparation, ritual." "You're wrong," Sophie said, dodging a tranquilizer dart and redirecting its trajectory into one of Victor's own men. Some connections transcend your understanding of how things work. Through the facility's sound system, she could hear the battle expanding. Caspian's pack had arrived in force, dismantling Victor's carefully prepared trap with coordinated efficiency. The gas designed to incapacitate shifters was being neutralized by pack members with specialized abilities, while the silver-lined capture pits were being bypassed by wolves who'd spent years training for exactly this kind of rescue operation. But Victor wasn't finished. Even as Sophie's power stripped away his stolen abilities, he pulled a final weapon from his jacket. A syringe filled with liquid that glowed with unnatural light. "If I can't control you," he snarled, "then I'll make sure no one can benefit from your abilities." The needle was aimed at Sophie's heart, designed to deliver a toxin that would corrupt her healing gifts into their opposite. A power that would cause death instead of life. But Caspian's wolf form intercepted the strike. Victor's syringe piercing fur and muscle instead of finding its intended target. Sophie felt the poison enter Caspian's bloodstream through their bond. Felt his system beginning to shut down as the toxin attacked his enhanced physiology. But she also felt something else. An opportunity. The mate bond worked both ways. If she could share his strength, then she could also share his burden. Sophie placed her hands on Caspian's wolf form, channeling not just healing energy, but her very life force into him. The toxin that would have killed him in minutes became something she could fight. Her power adapted specifically to purge foreign substances from living systems. But the effort required everything she had. Sophie felt her own strength draining away as she pulled Victor's poison into herself, using her body as a filter to cleanse what threatened her mate. The chamber around them began to blur as consciousness started slipping away. "No," Caspian's voice in her mind was fierce with denial. "Sophie, stop! You'll kill yourself. Better me than you." She managed to think back, though forming coherent thoughts was becoming increasingly difficult. Not acceptable. Caspian's human form materialized as he shifted back, his hands covering hers where they pressed against his chest. We do this together, or not at all. Their combined will focused the poison into a concentrated mass that Sophie's power could isolate and destroy. Instead of trying to process the toxin alone, they shared the burden between them, the mate bond, allowing them to divide what would have been fatal to either one separately. Victor watched in growing horror as his ultimate weapon was systematically neutralized. This isn't how it works. Mate bonds are emotional connections, not shared power sources. Shows how much you really know about shifters. Owen's voice came from the chamber entrance as Caspian's brother arrived with reinforcements. True mate bonds are the rarest and strongest connections in our world. They create partnerships that transcend individual limitations. The remaining guards surrendered as pack members filled the chamber, their coordinated assault having overwhelmed Victor's facility completely. But Sophie barely noticed their arrival. Her attention focused entirely on the man whose life she just saved and who had saved hers in return. "The bond is complete," Caspian said softly, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Sophie, do you understand what that means?" She nodded, feeling the connection between them as clearly as her own heartbeat. "It means we're partners in everything. It means you're Luna of the Western Territories," Owen said with a grin. "Alpha female to every shifter pack from here to the Pacific Ocean. Hope you're ready for some responsibility." Sophie looked around the chamber at the defeated facility, at the pack members who watched her with respect and expectation, at Caspian, whose life was now intertwined with hers in ways she was only beginning to understand. 24 hours ago, she'd been a veterinary student, worried about exam grades. Now she was something she'd never imagined possible. The mate of the most powerful alpha on the continent, with abilities that could heal or destroy, depending on how she chose to use them. "I'm ready," she said, surprised by how true the words felt. Victor laughed bitterly from where he lay restrained by Owen's men. "You have no idea what you've just committed yourself to. The human world won't tolerate your existence once they learn what you really are. They'll hunt you, study you, try to replicate what makes you special." "Let them try," Sophie said, her voice carrying an authority she'd never possessed before. "They'll find that some things can't be stolen or copied." She looked at Caspian, seeing her own determination reflected in his eyes. Whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together. The frightened woman who'd hidden in the clinic less than a week ago was gone, replaced by someone who understood her place in a larger world. The mate bond hummed between them, strong and unbreakable, promising a future neither could have imagined alone. Chapter 8. Forever Bound. 6 months had passed since the confrontation at Victor's facility, and Sophie was still adjusting to the reality of her transformed life. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office at Raven's Ridge, watching pack members go about their evening routines in the compound below. Children played in the courtyard while their parents finished work shifts, and patrol teams prepared for their nightly circuits through the forest. Second thoughts. Caspian's voice came from behind her, warm with affection and understanding. Sophie turned to find her mate leaning against the doorframe, still wearing the formal suit he'd donned for their video conference with the European pack leaders earlier that day. Even after months of being bonded, the sight of him still made her pulse quicken. "Never," she said, moving into his arms with the easy familiarity of established intimacy. "I was just thinking about how different everything is now." "Different how?" Caspian asked, his hands settling at her waist as he pulled her closer. 6 months ago, the most important decision I had to make was which textbook to study from. Sophie laughed, gesturing toward the papers spread across her desk. Now I'm reviewing territorial agreements and healing protocols for 12 different pack communities. The transition from veterinary student to Luna had been challenging, but deeply fulfilling. Sophie's unique abilities as a healer had revolutionized medical care throughout Caspian's territory, allowing her to establish treatment centers that served both shifters and the human communities that unknowingly bordered their lands. "Any regrets?" Caspian asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer.
"Only that it took a life-or-death situation for us to find each other," Sophie replied, reaching up to straighten his tie. "Though I suppose that's fitting for us." Their relationship had deepened steadily since completing the mate bond, but it had required adjustment from both sides. Caspian had learned to share the isolation of leadership, while Sophie had grown into authority she'd never expected to wield. The young woman, who'd once worried about paying rent, was now responsible for the welfare of thousands. A knock at the office door interrupted their moment. Luna entered carrying a tablet and wearing the expression that meant important news. "Sorry to interrupt," she said with a grin that suggested she wasn't particularly sorry, "but Dr. Martinez is here for your monthly evaluation, Sophie. And Owen wants to brief you both on the new territorial applications from the Midwest packs." Sophie sighed, stepping back from Caspian's embrace. The glamorous life of supernatural leadership. "Dr. Martinez first," Caspian decided. "The territorial discussions can wait until after we know how you're progressing." Dr. Martinez was the pack's senior medical officer, a woman whose shifting abilities had manifested in enhanced diagnostic senses rather than the typical wolf form. She'd been monitoring Sophie's development as a healer, documenting abilities that continued to evolve at an unprecedented rate. "How are you feeling?" Dr. Martinez asked, as she set up her monitoring equipment in the medical bay adjacent to Sophie's office. "Strong. Better than I ever have, actually," Sophie replied honestly. "The connection with Caspian has stabilized everything. My abilities don't feel wild or unpredictable anymore. That's consistent with what we're seeing in the data." Dr. Martinez confirmed, reviewing readings that tracked Sophie's energy output and healing capacity. "Your power levels have increased by nearly 30% since the bonding ceremony. But more importantly, your control has improved dramatically." The formal claiming ceremony had taken place 3 weeks after the rescue. A private ritual witnessed only by pack leadership and Sophie's chosen family within the community. Unlike human weddings, shifter bonding ceremonies focused on the spiritual and psychic connection between mates, creating legal and mystical ties that bound them in ways human marriage couldn't match. "Any unusual symptoms?" Dr. Ace Martinez continued her examination, taking blood samples that would reveal more than any human medical test could detect. "Actually, yes," Sophie said, glancing at Caspian. "I've been having vivid dreams lately. Not nightmares, but incredibly detailed visions of places I've never been, people I've never met. And sometimes I wake up knowing things I shouldn't know." Dr. Martinez paused in her work, exchanging a meaningful look with Caspian. "What kind of knowledge?" "Yesterday, I knew that a pack member in Oregon was injured before Owen received the emergency call." Sophie explained. "Last week, I woke up with detailed information about healing techniques that aren't in any textbook I've studied. Ancestral memory," Dr. Martinez said with excitement. "Your healer bloodline is connecting you to the knowledge of previous generations. It's incredibly rare, even among documented healers." "Is it dangerous?" Caspian asked, his protective instincts immediately activated. "Not dangerous, but significant.
Dr. Martinez replied. Sophie, you're developing into something beyond what we initially expected. The combination of your natural abilities, the mate bond enhancement, and now ancestral memory access makes you possibly the most powerful healer born in centuries. The implications hung heavy in the air. Power of that magnitude brought responsibility and risk in equal measure. There's something else, Sophie said quietly. I think I might be pregnant. The words hung in the sudden silence like a dropped bomb. Caspian went very still beside her, his expression cycling through surprise, joy, and protective concern. How long have you suspected? Dr. Martinez asked, her professional demeanor masking obvious excitement. A few weeks. The symptoms are subtle, but combined with the enhanced abilities and the strange dreams. Sophie shrugged. It feels different than anything I've experienced before. Dr. Martinez immediately began additional tests, her equipment humming with activity as it analyzed samples that would confirm or deny Sophie's suspicions. The wait felt eternal, filled with the weight of possibilities that would change everything once again. Congratulations, Dr. Martinez finally said with a broad smile. You're definitely pregnant. About 8 weeks along, based on the hormone levels and energy signatures I'm detecting, Sophie felt Caspian's arms wrap around her from behind, his joy and wonder flooding through their bond with overwhelming intensity. A child. Their child. The first offspring of a true healer and an alpha king and documented shifter history. What does this mean? Sophie asked, though she suspected the answer would be complicated. It means your child will be unique, Dr. Martinez replied carefully. The offspring of such powerful bloodlines has never been recorded. We're in uncharted territory, but the baby will be healthy, Caspian asked, his voice tight with concern. As far as I can determine, perfectly healthy, Dr. Martinez assured them. But Sophie, your abilities will likely continue evolving throughout the pregnancy. We'll need to monitor you closely. Later that evening, Sophie and Caspian walked through the forest surrounding Raven's Ridge, following paths they'd traveled countless times during their bonding period. The woods felt different now, not just familiar, but truly home. Are you scared? Sophie asked, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. Terrified? Caspian admitted with characteristic honesty. I've led packs through wars and territorial disputes, but the thought of being responsible for a child who might inherit both our abilities, he shook his head. That's a level of responsibility I never imagined. We'll figure it out together, Sophie said, echoing words he'd spoken to her during their first weeks at the compound. That's what mates do. They paused at their favorite overlook, where the valley spread out below them, dotted with the lights of the compound. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled their evening songs to the rising moon. Do you ever miss your old life? Caspian asked. Sophie considered the question seriously. I miss the simplicity sometimes. But that woman who worried about exam grades and rent payments was living half a life. She didn't know what she was capable of, didn't understand her place in the world. And now you do. Now I know that some people are meant for extraordinary things. Sophie replied, turning to face him. I was terrified that night in the clinic when you walked through the door, but part of me recognized you even then, recognized home. Caspian kissed her with the passion and tenderness that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. A perfect blend of gentle devotion and fierce protection. Through their bond, Sophie felt his absolute commitment to their future, his determination to build a world where their child could grow up safe and strong. I love you, he said against her lips, words that carried the weight of eternity. I love you, too, Sophie replied, her hand finding the business card she still carried in her pocket. A reminder of the wrong number that had led to everything right in her life. Above them, the full moon cast silver light across the forest, illuminating the path that had brought them together and would carry them into whatever challenges awaited. They were no longer just individual people trying to survive in a complex world. They were mates, partners, leaders of a community that looked to them for protection and guidance. And soon, they would be parents to a child who would inherit abilities that could reshape the relationship between human and shifter worlds. Whatever came next, they would face it together, bound by love and destiny in equal measure. The future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility and anchored by the unbreakable connection forged in crisis and strengthened by choice. Sophie Carter, the frightened veterinary student, was gone forever. In her place stood Sophie Cross, Luna, healer, and mother-to-be, ready for whatever extraordinary adventures lay ahead.